I remember the moment that Michael realized his childhood was over, and it terrified him. It was my first assignment, and Michael at the time was in high school. And what happened was he and his friends were roughhousing with another student in the locker room, whom, if I remember correctly, was counted among their friendships. But roughhousing when you're 17 looks a lot different than when you're 7. And at a certain point in this, Michael takes it too far. And when he does that, this firestorm erupts that he no longer had any control over. The parents called the principal called the police. Language like sexual assault, battery, pressing charges starts swirling around him. He's kicked off the football team. He's expelled from school. He loses his entire circle of friends. He was scared. And just like that, the impunity of childhood vanished for him. And he realized the hard way that society viewed him differently, that it expected more from him, that from now on the stakes were higher. As human beings, we are endowed with moral responsibilities, which is fascinating. We are the only creature on earth that thinks in terms of right and wrong, even though we may disagree with what those words mean. We also recognize that our moral consciousness is something that develops over time, and this is reflected in the law and the way it treats a minor differently than it does an adult. It's critical then, as one of the core tasks of mothers and fathers, to help us see this moral responsibility that we bear as individuals, meaning what I do in private does matter, but also in relation to society, how my decisions and behaviors either hurt or help the community at large. And when society is operating at its best, she takes seriously those responsibilities, as Michael quickly discovered through his principal, his parents, and the police. But while the full weight of our social responsibilities is far too great to put on any child, it is true that we are not meant to be children forever. And at some point, that expectation begins to develop. And understanding that point, that transition moment in the natural order of things, is of great advantage to us because it applies also in the spiritual life. When John confronts Jesus today about this non-disciple who's out there casting out demons, he's essentially making a moral claim. He's telling the Lord that this man is acting like a disciple. He's doing the things that the apostles are supposed to be doing. But he's not a disciple, and he has not been appointed by Christ to be an apostle. So what he's doing is wrong. It's deceptive. Jesus' response is very revealing. He doesn't disagree with John's complaint, but he does treat this strange, nameless man like a spiritual child. Okay, he might not be a disciple in the fullest sense of the word, but he is demonstrating basic faith in Jesus, which, is more than most of the Jewish people. He's motivating other people to call on Jesus' name. He's exorcising demons in that name, which means he's teaching people that the name of Jesus has power. That's not a bad thing. And not for nothing. He's trying. He's out there grinding, he's doing it. So by orientation, the man is facing Christ. And Jesus sees that, and he's patient with him. In the same way that parents are patient with their children in all of their social awkwardnesses. No one expects children to be articulate, right? We expect them to have a certain level of clumsy about them, and that's fine because they're just children. But again, at a certain point, we are not spiritual children anymore. And this is when we see Jesus in the gospel pivot, and he's turning to those who are following him, who ought to be farther along in the spiritual life, and therefore from whom more is expected. And he says to them, if any of you cause one of the little ones to sin, it would be better for you to take a huge stone, tie it around your neck, and hurl yourself into the sea. That's a big difference between how he's treating this stranger and how he's treating his disciples. And it's a little bit confusing because it's like, yeah, we're the ones that actually love you. Right, so I can expect more from you because he's not there yet. And discerning that difference in our own lives is critical. Let me give you a personal example. My mother was not raised Catholic. She wasn't raised strongly in any tradition in particular, and she never received substantial training in the disciplines of the Christian life. So when she, after decades of religious inactivity, approached me a while back and said that she was going to begin attending a local Episcopal service, I supported her 100%. And even today, I'll still ask her, did you go? How was the sermon? What did he say? Tell me about the friends you're making. And I encourage her, you should get involved. She's beginning to find opportunities for volunteering. I don't immediately slap her with all my theological disagreements with the gospel and the version of that gospel that she's hearing. When she gives me liturgical advice from things that she's experienced during her service, I'm not pushing back. I quietly discard. But my uncle, who was born and raised a Catholic, when he told me that he was leaving the Catholic Church for something else that better suited his preferences, my tone was much different. Here is a man who benefited from the fullness of the truth his entire life. And as a father who is responsible for handing that truth on to his children, this is a serious matter. Rather than teach them to sacrifice their preferences for Christ, he was teaching them to sacrifice Christ for their preferences. And as Jesus tells us today, he takes those failures seriously. And so for him, I held him accountable to that. Because more is expected from him. So for ourselves, what does this mean? I find the gospel message today to be both consoling and challenging. It's consoling because what it should tell us is that we don't have to have it all figured out, all worked out by today. Jesus is very patient. And if we are facing him, if we're oriented towards him, he's going to nudge us along, and he will do that in time. And we must exercise that same patience with ourselves, but also the people whom God has entrusted into our life. But it's challenging because that patience is not meant to be a license. And at a certain point, that child has to grow. That tree has to bear fruit. Every one of us is going to give an account of our lives before God. And so the time that we have today is meant to be spent in preparation for that. So it has to get there. Which is why we seize every day with the urgency that is appropriate to the Christian life. But above all, we try to help our children and our families and our friends to do the same.